On a typical Saturday afternoon, the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden rays over Greenfield National Park. The air carried the earthy scent of pine and fresh grass, mingling with the distant chirping of birds. Ethan Hayes, a park ranger, in his mid-30s, walked along one of the park's winding trails, his boots crunching softly against the gravel path. He wasn't particularly remarkable to look at, average height, lean build, with short brown hair and a calm demeanor, but there was something comforting about his presence. People often said Ethan had a way of making others feel safe, like he could handle anything life threw at him. Ethan loved his job. Every day brought something new, helping lost hikers find their way, tending to injured animals, or simply ensuring visitors enjoyed their time in nature without disturbing its delicate balance. Today, however, seemed unusually quiet. As he strolled deeper into the forest, the only sounds were the rustling leaves overhead and the occasional buzz of insects flitting between flowers. It was peaceful, a welcome break from the chaos of the outside world. But peace rarely lasts long in places like this. Just as Ethan rounded a bend in the trail, a shrill scream shattered the tranquility. Startled, he froze for a moment, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. Another scream followed, louder this time, laced with panic. Without wasting a second, Ethan broke into a run, his heart pounding as adrenaline surged through his veins. The source of the commotion soon became clear. Bursting into a small clearing, Ethan saw a woman standing near a cluster of bushes, her arms flailing wildly as she tried to fend off what appeared to be a swarm of bees. They buzzed angrily around her head, their movements erratic and aggressive. She stumbled backward, tripping over roots and rocks, her face contorted in terror. Her designer blouse was already torn in several places, and her once stylish sunglasses dangled precariously from one ear. Ethan didn't hesitate. Years of training kicked in as he quickly assessed the situation. Bee swarms weren't uncommon in these parts, especially during warmer months when they were more active, but encountering one unprepared could easily turn dangerous. Drawing a deep breath, Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out an emergency thermal blanket. These blankets were designed to reflect heat, but they also worked wonders as protective barriers in situations like this. "Stay still," Ethan shouted, his voice firm yet reassuring. "I'm here to help." The woman barely registered his words, too overwhelmed by fear to focus. Bees darted closer, some landing on her exposed skin, while others hovered menacingly around her face. Ethan moved quickly, wrapping the blanket tightly around her shoulders and pulling it up to cover her head. The fabric shimmered faintly in the sunlight, creating a makeshift shield that blocked the bees' access. "Keep your hands inside," Ethan instructed, guiding her away from the swarm. "Don't swat at them. It'll only make them angrier." Step by step, he led her out of the clearing and onto the main trail, keeping a steady pace despite the urgency of the moment. The buzzing grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the hive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a safe spot beneath a large oak tree. Ethan gently lowered the blanket, revealing the woman's pale and trembling face. She sank to the ground, clutching her knees to her chest as tears streamed down her cheeks. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The woman gasped for air, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to regain her composure. Ethan crouched beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're okay now," he said softly. "They're gone." She nodded weakly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." Ethan shrugged modestly. "Just doing my job," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "What were you doing out here alone? This isn't exactly beginner territory." The woman hesitated before answering. "I just needed some space," she admitted. "Things have been complicated lately. I thought hiking would help me clear my mind." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Guess I underestimated how much trouble I'd get into." Despite the gravity of the situation, Ethan couldn't help but chuckle lightly. "Well, lesson learned, I hope. Nature can be beautiful, but it's not always forgiving." As the initial shock began to wear off, The woman straightened up slightly, brushing dirt and leaves from her clothes. For the first time, Ethan noticed the subtle signs of wealth in her appearance. The expensive watch peeking out from under her sleeve, the pristine leather bag lying forgotten nearby. Something about her demeanor suggested she wasn't used to being in such dire straits. "I'm Clara, by the way," she said, extending a hand toward him. Her grip was surprisingly strong, considering everything she'd just been through. "Ethan," he replied, shaking her hand. "Glad I could help, Clara." They sat together under the oak tree for a while longer, chatting casually as Clara recovered from the ordeal. Ethan asked a few questions about her hike, careful not to pry too much, while Clara expressed her amazement at how calm and collected he'd remained throughout the rescue. There was a warmth in her tone that made Ethan feel oddly at ease, despite the stark contrast between their lives. Eventually, Clara stood up, smoothing out her disheveled outfit as best she could. "I owe you more than just a thank you," she said earnestly. "If there's ever anything I can do for you, please let me know." Ethan waved off the offer with a grin. "No need. Like I said, it's all part of the job." Clara smiled back, though there was a determined glint in her eye. Before leaving, she handed Ethan a small business card embossed with elegant lettering. "Just in case," she said cryptically, then turned and walked away, disappearing down the trail. It wasn't until later that evening, when Ethan returned home and finally glanced at the card, that he realized who Clara truly was. His jaw dropped as he read the name printed neatly across the front. Clara Whitmore. A quick internet search confirmed his suspicions. She was none other than the heiress to Whitmore Industries, a multi-billion-dollar empire known worldwide. Stunned, Ethan stared at the card for a long moment, wondering how fate had managed to bring two people from such different worlds together in such an unexpected way. Little did he know this chance encounter was only the beginning of a story far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The next few days passed in a blur for Ethan. He went about his usual routine, patrolling the park, answering visitor questions, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But his mind kept drifting back to the mysterious woman he'd rescued, Clara Whitmore. The name echoed in his thoughts, accompanied by flashes of her tear-streaked face and the gratitude in her voice. She had seemed so out of place in the wilderness, like a rare bird that had wandered far from its natural habitat. Yet, there was something undeniably genuine about her, something that lingered in his memory long after their encounter. Ethan wasn't one to dwell on things unnecessarily. He prided himself on living a simple life, free from complications or unnecessary drama. But curiosity got the better of him. On a quiet evening, after finishing his shift at the park, he sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop open. The business card Clara had given him lay beside it, pristine and unassuming. Her name was embossed in elegant gold lettering, along with a phone number and an email address. It felt oddly surreal to hold such a small object that connected him to someone who clearly lived in an entirely different world. With a mix of hesitation and intrigue, Ethan typed Clara Whitmore into a search engine. What he found left him speechless. Page after page of results popped up, detailing her prominence as the heiress to Whitmore Industries, a global conglomerate known for luxury goods, real estate development, and cutting-edge technology. Photos of her attending high-profile events filled the screen. Gala fundraisers, charity auctions, magazine covers. In every picture, she looked polished and poised, dressed in designer gowns and surrounded by people who radiated wealth and power. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. This was the same woman who had been screaming in terror just days ago, swarmed by bees in the middle of nowhere. The contrast was staggering. How did someone like her end up alone in the woods? And why would she risk hiking in unfamiliar terrain without proper preparation? Questions swirled in his mind, but none of them brought any answers. As he scrolled further, Ethan learned more about her background. Clara was the only child of Richard Whitmore, a billionaire tycoon whose name commanded respect and sometimes fear in business circles. From a young age, Clara had been groomed to take over the family empire. Yet, according to interviews and articles, she often spoke of feeling suffocated by the weight of expectations. She craved freedom, simplicity, and authenticity, things money couldn't buy. A particular quote caught Ethan's attention. "I want to make a difference, not just add zeros to my bank account." It resonated deeply with him. Despite their vastly different lives, Ethan recognized a kindred spirit in Clara. Like him, she seemed drawn to the idea of preserving nature and making the world a better place. Maybe that was why she ventured into the park, to escape the pressures of her gilded cage and reconnect with something real. Still, Ethan couldn't shake off the unease creeping into his thoughts. He knew how stories like this usually played, out in movies or books. A wealthy heiress meets an ordinary guy and suddenly chaos ensues. Misunderstandings, jealousies, and societal judgments follow. Was he naive to think anything good could come from crossing paths with someone like Clara? Or worse, would she forget all about him once she returned to her glittering world? His musings were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing on the table. Glancing at the screen, he saw an unknown number flashing. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Ethan?" "Hi, it's Clara." Her voice was warm and unmistakable, carrying a hint of nervousness. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, not at all," Ethan replied, trying to mask his surprise. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, thanks to you," she said with a soft laugh. "I wanted to thank you again, for everything. You saved me out there, and I'll never forget that." "It was nothing," Ethan insisted, though his cheeks flushed slightly at the praise. "Just glad I happened to be nearby." "Well, nothing is a pretty big understatement," Clara countered. "Anyway, I feel like a simple thank you isn't enough. I'd really love to show my appreciation properly. Would you be willing to join me for dinner sometime? My treat, of course." Ethan hesitated. Dinner? With Clara Whitmore? The thought felt surreal, like stepping into a scene from a fairy tale. He didn't belong in fancy restaurants or high society gatherings. His wardrobe consisted mostly of practical outdoor gear, not tailored suits or polished dress shoes. But there was sincerity in her voice, a genuine desire to express her gratitude. Turning her down outright seemed rude. "I appreciate the offer," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But I don't want you to feel obligated, really. It's part of my job to help people." "I know," Clara replied quickly. "And I respect that. But I also believe in acknowledging kindness when I see it. Please, say yes. I promise it won't be anything too formal." Her persistence and the warmth in her tone finally won him over. "All right," Ethan agreed. "Dinner sounds nice." "Great," Clara exclaimed, sounding genuinely pleased. "Let me know what day works for you, and I'll handle the rest." After hanging up, Ethan stared at his phone, half expecting to wake up and realize the entire conversation had been a dream. Instead, reality settled in, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What had he just agreed to? The day of the dinner arrived sooner than Ethan expected. He spent hours debating what to wear, eventually settling on a pair of dark jeans and a button-down shirt. It wasn't exactly black tie attire, but it was the best he could do on short notice. As he drove toward the restaurant Clara had chosen, a chic bistro downtown, he felt increasingly out of place. The sleek glass buildings and bustling streets were a stark contrast to the serene forests he called home. When he arrived, Clara was already waiting outside. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that complemented her features perfectly, her hair styled in loose waves. Seeing her standing there, calm and composed, made Ethan wonder if he'd imagined her panicked state during the bee attack. Yet, when she spotted him approaching, her face lit up with a smile that put him instantly at ease. "You made it," she said, extending a hand in greeting. "I'm so glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," Ethan replied, returning her smile. "Thanks for inviting me." Inside, the restaurant exuded sophistication. Soft lighting illuminated tables adorned with fresh flowers, and the faint hum of classical music created an atmosphere of refinement. A waiter led them to a cozy corner booth, where they settled in with menus in hand. Ethan glanced around nervously, acutely aware of the stares from other patrons. He must have looked completely out of place among the impeccably dressed crowd. To his relief, Clara seemed unfazed. She chatted animatedly, asking about his work at the park and sharing anecdotes about her own experiences growing up. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself relaxing. Clara had a way of making even the most mundane topics fascinating, her enthusiasm infectious. She talked about her passion for environmental conservation, revealing plans to launch initiatives aimed at protecting endangered species and preserving natural habitats. "That's incredible," Ethan said, genuinely impressed. "You're using your resources to make a real impact." "I've always believed wealth comes with responsibility," Clara explained. "It's not just about accumulating more, it's about giving back. That's why I admire what you do. You dedicate your life to protecting nature, even though it's not glamorous or lucrative." Ethan shrugged modestly. "Someone has to look out for the parks. They're treasures we can't afford to lose." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. For the first time, Ethan forgot about the differences between them. In that moment, they were simply two people connecting over shared values and aspirations. As dessert was served, Clara leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Ethan, I have to admit something. When we met, I wasn't expecting, well, someone like you. You're so grounded and sincere, it's refreshing." "I could say the same about you," Ethan admitted with a grin. "You're not exactly what I pictured either." They laughed together, the sound light and carefree. For a brief moment, the world outside faded away, leaving only the warmth of connection. Neither of them realized then how much that night would shape the course of their lives. The dinner had gone better than Ethan could have imagined. Despite his initial nerves, he found himself genuinely enjoying Clara's company. Her intelligence and passion for meaningful causes intrigued him, and her down-to-earth nature made her feel less like the glamorous heiress he'd read about online, and more like a real person with hopes, fears, and dreams. By the end of the evening, they were laughing over shared stories and exchanging ideas about how to make a difference in the world. It was as if the gap between their worlds had narrowed, even if just for a moment. As they stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, Clara paused on the sidewalk, turning to face Ethan. "I'm really glad we did this," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "It's not often I meet someone who understands what truly matters." Ethan smiled, feeling a flicker of pride at her words. "Me too. Thanks for inviting me. I wasn't sure I'd fit in, but you made it easy." Clara tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that was both curious and appreciative. "You know, my family has a place upstate, a quiet estate surrounded by woods and lakes. We use it for retreats sometimes, but it's mostly peaceful these days. I'd love for you to see it." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. "Your estate?" The word felt foreign on his tongue, conjuring images of sprawling mansions and manicured gardens far removed from anything he'd ever experienced. "Yes," Clara replied matter-of-factly. "It's nothing fancy. Well, maybe by some standards it is, but it's where I go when I need space to think. You seem like someone who appreciates nature, so I thought you might enjoy it." Ethan hesitated. He knew accepting the invitation meant stepping even deeper into Clara's world, a realm he didn't fully understand and certainly didn't belong to. But there was something about her sincerity that made it hard to say no. She wasn't asking out of obligation or politeness. She genuinely wanted him to come. "I don't want to intrude," he said finally, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "That sounds like a pretty personal place." "You wouldn't be intruding," Clara assured him. "If anything, your perspective would be refreshing, and besides—" She paused, a playful glint in her eye. "Don't you owe me another adventure after saving me from those bees?" Her light-hearted tone broke through Ethan's hesitation and he chuckled. All right. When do you want me to come?" "How about next weekend?" Clara suggested. "I'll send you the details. Trust me, you'll love it." The following Saturday morning, Ethan stood outside his small cabin, staring at the suitcase he'd packed for the trip. It was laughably modest compared to what he imagined people brought to a Whitmore estate, but he reminded himself that practicality was key. After all, he was still the same guy who spent most of his time hiking trails and tending to wildlife. He couldn't pretend to be anyone else. When a sleek black car pulled up to pick him up, Ethan felt a wave of unease wash over him. The driver, dressed in a crisp uniform, greeted him with a polite nod and opened the door for him. As Ethan slid into the plush leather seat, he couldn't help but marvel at the stark contrast between this luxury vehicle and his beat-up old truck. This wasn't just a different world. It was practically another universe. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through picturesque countryside roads until they reached a gated entrance marked by towering stone pillars. Beyond them lay a long driveway flanked by perfectly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds. At the end of the drive stood the estate itself, a grand mansion with white columns, expansive windows, and a sweeping veranda overlooking acres of lush greenery. Ethan stepped out of the car momentarily overwhelmed. The sheer scale of the property was breathtaking, and yet it somehow managed to exude a sense of calm rather than opulence. Birds chirped in the distance, and the gentle rustling of leaves added to the serene atmosphere. "Welcome," Clara said, appearing on the porch with a warm smile. She looked relaxed in jeans and a cozy sweater, a stark contrast to the polished image he'd seen in photos. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful," Ethan admitted, looking around in awe. "This is yours?" "Well, technically it belongs to the family," Clara corrected, leading him inside. "But yes, it's mine when I need it. Come on, I'll show you around." The interior of the house was just as impressive as the exterior, though Clara seemed eager to play down its extravagance. She pointed out various rooms, a library filled with books, a sunroom bathed in natural light, and a cozy living room with a crackling fireplace, but focused more on the views of the surrounding landscape. Large windows framed scenes of rolling hills, dense forests, and a shimmering lake in the distance. "This is incredible," Ethan said honestly. "It must be nice to have a place like this to escape to." "It is," Clara agreed, her gaze drifting toward the window. "But it can also feel isolating sometimes. Being here reminds me of how much responsibility comes with privilege. I try to use this space wisely, to recharge, reflect, and plan ways to give back." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Despite their differences, he saw glimpses of the same values that guided his own life. A desire to protect and preserve, to leave the world better than they found it. Later that afternoon, Clara invited Ethan to join her for a walk along one of the estate's many trails. The path wound through dense woods, eventually opening onto a secluded clearing overlooking the lake. They sat together on a wooden bench, watching sunlight dance across the water. "I haven't brought many people here," Clara confessed after a while. "Most of my friends wouldn't appreciate the simplicity of it, but I thought you might." "I do," Ethan replied sincerely. "It's peaceful, almost magical." They talked for hours, sharing stories about their childhoods, their struggles, and their dreams. Clara spoke candidly about the pressure of living up to her family's legacy, while Ethan opened up about his own insecurities and doubts. For the first time, Ethan realized how much they had in common beneath the surface. Both of them carried burdens unique to their circumstances, yet both sought solace in nature and purpose in helping others. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. As they stood on the veranda, sipping hot tea and watching the horizon fade into twilight, Ethan felt a strange sense of belonging. It wasn't because of the luxurious surroundings or the wealth that came with them. It was because of Clara. She had let him into her world without pretense, trusting him enough to share her vulnerabilities. And as the stars began to twinkle above, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected connection might lead to something greater. The weekend at the Whitmore estate passed in a blur of quiet moments and meaningful conversations. Ethan had never imagined he'd feel so comfortable in such an opulent setting, but Clara's warmth and authenticity made it easy to forget the extravagance surrounding them. They spent their days exploring the vast grounds, sharing meals on the veranda, and talking late into the night about everything from global conservation efforts to personal aspirations. For Ethan, it was like stepping into a dream, a surreal yet deeply grounding experience. But as much as Ethan enjoyed his time with Clara, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this world wasn't meant for him. The contrast between their lives was glaring. While Clara moved effortlessly through her privileged existence, Ethan's life was rooted in simplicity and practicality. He often wondered how long he could keep up the charade before someone, perhaps even Clara herself, realized he didn't belong here. On Sunday afternoon, just as Ethan was preparing to leave, Clara introduced him to her parents. Richard Whitmore, a tall, imposing man with sharp features and an air of authority, greeted Ethan with a firm handshake and a scrutinizing gaze. Beside him stood Evelyn Whitmore, elegant and poised, her smile polite but distant. Both exuded the kind of confidence that only decades of wealth and power could cultivate. "Ethan, it's a pleasure," Richard said, his tone measured. "Clara tells us you've been quite the hero." Ethan shifted uncomfortably under the weight of Richard's words. "I wouldn't say that, sir. I was just doing my job." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Ethan's modesty.
"Modesty is admirable, but let's not downplay your actions. Saving someone's life is no small feat." Before Ethan could respond, Evelyn interjected smoothly.
"We're grateful for what you did, Ethan. Clara means the world to us, and knowing she was in good hands brings us peace." Her words were kind enough, but there was something beneath the surface, a subtle undertone of skepticism that Ethan couldn't quite place. It was as if they were sizing him up, trying to determine whether he posed any threat to their carefully curated world. Over lunch, the conversation turned casual, or at least it appeared that way. Richard asked Ethan about his work at the park, nodding approvingly when Ethan spoke passionately about wildlife preservation and environmental education. Evelyn chimed in with questions about his family and upbringing, her curiosity seemingly genuine. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that every answer he gave was being dissected and analyzed. At one point, Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan intently. "You seem like a hard-working young man, Ethan. Tell me, do you have any plans for the future? Any ambitions beyond park rangering?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He hesitated, unsure how to respond without sounding either arrogant or dismissive. "Well, sir, I've always dreamed of starting an organization focused on protecting endangered ecosystems. But for now, I'm happy where I am." Richard nodded slowly, though his expression remained unreadable. "Admirable goals. However, ambition requires resources, doesn't it? Passion alone won't get you very far." Ethan bristled slightly at the implication but kept his composure. "I suppose that's true, sir. But sometimes passion is all you need to start making a difference." Clara, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up then. "Dad, Ethan has already made a difference. You should see the work he does. It's inspiring." Richard glanced at his daughter, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Of course, dear. We trust your judgment." Despite the outward politeness, Ethan sensed underlying tension. After lunch, as they strolled through the gardens, Clara pulled him aside. "Don't mind them too much," she said softly. "They're just protective of me." "I understand," Ethan replied, though doubt lingered in his voice. "But I can't help feeling like I don't fit in here." Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You don't have to fit in, not completely. All that matters is that you're true to yourself. That's why I admire you." Her words brought some comfort, but the seed of insecurity had already taken root. As Ethan drove home later that evening, he replayed the day's events in his mind. The Whitmores' scrutiny weighed heavily on him, reminding him of the chasm between their worlds. Could he ever bridge that gap? And more importantly, did he even want to? Back at work, Ethan tried to focus on his duties, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara and her family. Over the next few weeks, they stayed in touch, exchanging texts and phone calls regularly. Clara seemed determined to include him in her life, inviting him to charity events and introducing him to friends who shared her passion for philanthropy. At first, Ethan resisted, fearing he'd stick out like a sore thumb. But Clara insisted, assuring him that he belonged wherever she was. One evening, they attended a gala hosted by Whitmore Industries to raise funds for environmental causes. Dressed in a borrowed suit and tie, Ethan felt painfully out of place among the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. Guests mingled freely, discussing investments in vacation homes while sipping champagne. Ethan clung to Clara's side, grateful for her presence as a buffer against the overwhelming environment. To his surprise, however, people were surprisingly welcoming. Several attendees complimented him on his dedication to conservation, asking thoughtful questions about his work. One woman even expressed interest in collaborating on a project to restore local wetlands. By the end of the night, Ethan began to realize that perhaps not everyone in Clara's circle judged him based on his background. Still, whispers followed them wherever they went. Rumors swirled about their budding relationship, fueled by tabloids, eager to sensationalize the story of the park ranger and the heiress. Some speculated that Ethan was using Clara for her money, while others accused her of slumming it for attention. Neither accusation sat well with Ethan, and he worried about how it might affect Clara. "You know none of that is true, right?" Clara said one night after reading an especially scathing article online. Her tone was calm but tinged with frustration. "People will always talk, but we can't let them dictate our lives." "I know," Ethan replied, though guilt gnawed at him. "But I hate seeing you dragged into this mess because of me." "It's not because of you," Clara countered firmly. "It's because society loves drama. If anything, being with you reminds me of what really matters. You ground me, Ethan. Don't ever forget that." Her conviction bolstered Ethan's resolve, but doubts continued to creep in. Was he strong enough to navigate this complicated terrain? Could their relationship survive the pressures of public scrutiny and familial expectations? Each question loomed larger than the last, casting shadows over what had once felt so natural and effortless. Yet, despite the challenges, Ethan found himself unwilling to walk away. Clara had become more than just the woman he'd rescued from. A bee swarm, she was a partner, a confidant, and a source of inspiration. Together they faced each obstacle head-on, drawing strength from their shared values and unwavering support for one another. And as they stood together on the balcony of Clara's penthouse apartment, one crisp autumn evening, watching the city, lights twinkle below, Ethan realized something profound. Love wasn't about fitting perfectly into someone else's world. It was about building a new one together, one where both partners could grow, thrive, and remain true to themselves. As weeks turned into months, Ethan and Clara's bond deepened. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges, far from it, but they faced each obstacle with a determination that spoke volumes about their commitment to one another. The whispers and rumors swirling around them only seemed to grow louder, fueled by tabloids eager to sensationalize their story. Headlines like "Heiress Falls for Park Ranger" or "Love Across the Divide" dominated gossip columns, painting their romance in dramatic strokes that bore little resemblance to reality. At first, Ethan tried to ignore the headlines, focusing instead on his work at the park and the growing connection he shared with Clara. But as the scrutiny intensified, it became harder to tune out. Friends and colleagues would occasionally mention something they'd read online, their comments ranging from supportive to skeptical. Some questioned whether Ethan was truly happy with someone like Clara, while others wondered if Clara saw him as more than just a fleeting distraction. Clara, too, felt the weight of public opinion. Her family remained divided about her relationship with Ethan. While Evelyn had softened slightly, offering polite smiles during their rare interactions, Richard continued to voice his disapproval openly. He didn't outright forbid Clara from seeing Ethan. He knew better than to push her away. But his subtle jabs were impossible to miss. "You deserve someone who can match your ambitions," Richard said one evening over dinner, his tone deceptively casual. "Someone who understands the responsibilities that come with our name." Clara set down her fork, meeting her father's gaze with quiet resolve. "Ethan understands me better than anyone else ever has, Dad. That's worth more than any title or bank account." Richard sighed, shaking his head. I'm not saying he isn't a good man, Clara. I'm simply pointing out the realities of life. Relationships are built on shared foundations, and yours, well, let's just say it's unconventional. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Unconventional. It wasn't necessarily an insult, but it carried an undertone of judgment that Clara found exhausting. She loved her father deeply, but she couldn't help feeling suffocated by his expectations. For years, she'd played the role of the dutiful heiress, attending galas, networking with influential figures, and towing the line between personal desires and family obligations. Meeting Ethan had awakened something in her, a longing for authenticity, simplicity, and a life driven by purpose rather than prestige. Despite her father's reservations, Clara refused to back down. She believed wholeheartedly in what she and Ethan were building together. Love, she realized, wasn't about finding someone exactly like you. It was about complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses. Ethan brought clarity and grounding to her chaotic world, reminding her of the beauty and simplicity. In turn, Clara encouraged Ethan to dream bigger, helping him see that passion could be amplified with resources. Their differences, once sources of insecurity, began to feel like opportunities. Clara introduced Ethan to influential figures in environmental advocacy, connecting him with people who could help bring his ideas to life. Together, they brainstormed ways to merge conservation efforts with sustainable business practices, creating models that balanced profit with planet. Ethan, for his part, inspired Clara to step outside her comfort zone, showing her the joy of getting her hands dirty, literally. They spent weekends planting trees, cleaning up local parks, and teaching children about the importance of protecting nature. But even as their partnership flourished, external pressures mounted. One particularly challenging moment came when a high-profile magazine published a scathing article questioning Ethan's intentions. The piece painted him as a gold digger, accusing him of pursuing Clara solely for her wealth and status. Though the claims were baseless, the damage was done. Comments flooded social media, some defending Ethan and others echoing the article's accusations. When Ethan first saw the headline, his stomach sank. He called Clara immediately, expecting her to be upset, or worse, angry with him. Instead, she sounded calm and resolute. "Don't let it get to you," she said firmly. "This isn't about us. It's about clicks and ratings. People will always find something to criticize, but we know the truth." Her unwavering support meant everything to Ethan. Still, the experience left him shaken. He began to question whether he was strong enough to withstand the constant scrutiny. Could he handle being the center of attention simply because of who he was dating? Did he want to? One night, after another exhausting day of dealing with snide remarks and sideways glances, Ethan finally voiced his concerns. They sat together, on Clara's couch, the soft glow of a table lamp casting warm light across the room. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, adding a somber backdrop to their conversation. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "Every time I turn around, there's another article or comment or rumor. I never wanted any of this, Clara. I just wanted to live quietly, do my job, and maybe make a difference along the way." Clara reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it's hard, Ethan. Believe me, I've lived under a microscope my entire life. But none of that matters if we have each other. We're stronger together than apart." Ethan looked at her, searching her face for signs of doubt. All he saw was sincerity. "But don't you ever wonder if it's too much? If we're asking too much of each other?" "Of course I do," Clara replied honestly. "There are days when I question everything, but then I think about what we've already overcome and how much better my life is because of you. You've shown me that happiness doesn't come from money or power. It comes from living authentically and fighting for what matters." Her words struck a chord deep within Ethan. He realized then that their struggles weren't unique. They were universal. Every relationship required sacrifice, compromise, and resilience. What made theirs special was the foundation they'd built: trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. With renewed determination, Ethan decided to lean into their partnership fully. Rather than shrinking away from the spotlight, he embraced, and not for himself, but for the causes they cared about. Together, he and Clara launched a series of initiatives aimed at preserving natural habitats, funding research on endangered species, and educating communities about sustainability. They traveled to conferences, gave interviews, and hosted events, using their platform to amplify voices often overlooked in discussions about environmental conservation. The response was overwhelming. People responded to their authenticity, drawn to the genuine love and respect they had for each other. Critics who had once dismissed their relationship began to soften, recognizing the positive impact they were making together. Even Richard Whitmore, though still cautious, started to acknowledge Ethan's contributions, praising his dedication to meaningful causes. Through it all, Ethan and Clara grew closer, their bond fortified by the challenges they'd faced. They learned to navigate the complexities of their worlds, finding common ground where none seemed possible. And as they stood side by side planting saplings in a newly restored forest, Ethan realized something profound. Love wasn't about avoiding obstacles. It was about facing them together and emerging stronger on the other side. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt at peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that Clara was worth every step. Months had passed since Ethan and Clara first stood together in the forest, planting saplings as a symbol of their shared commitment to the planet and to each other. What started as an unlikely encounter between two people from vastly different worlds had blossomed into something neither could have predicted. A partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared vision for the future. But as their relationship evolved, so did the paths they chose to walk. Paths that would ultimately redefine not just their lives, but the legacy they wanted to leave behind. One crisp autumn morning, Clara called Ethan into her home office. The room was bright with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating stacks of papers and binders spread across her desk. She looked up at him, her expression serious yet hopeful. "I've made a decision," she said, her voice steady, "and I need you to hear me out." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "All right, what's going on?" Clara took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Whitmore Industries." The words hit Ethan like a thunderclap. "Wait, what? Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Clara replied firmly. "Running the company has always been expected of me, but it's not where my heart lies. You've shown me that wealth isn't about power or control, it's about responsibility. I want to dedicate my time and resources to causes that truly matter, to protecting the environment, supporting communities, and making a tangible difference." Ethan stared at her, processing the enormity of her decision. Stepping away from a multi-billion-dollar empire wasn't something most people would consider lightly. It spoke volumes about Clara's courage and conviction. "That's incredible," he said finally, his admiration evident. "But are you ready for the backlash? Your family, the board, everyone's going to have opinions." "They already do," Clara admitted with a wry smile. "But I don't care anymore. This is my life, and I'm choosing how to live it. Besides," she paused, reaching for his hand, "I won't be doing this alone. Will you join me?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Join you? Doing what?" "Helping me build something new," Clara explained. "Something meaningful. Together, we can create an organization focused entirely on conservation and sustainability. We'll use Whitmore's resources, not to make profits, but to heal the planet. And I can't think of anyone better to lead it than you." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Leading an organization was a far cry from his role as a park ranger, but the idea ignited a spark within him. He'd spent years dreaming of ways to expand his impact, to protect ecosystems beyond the confines of Greenfield National Park. With Clara's support, those dreams suddenly felt attainable. "I'll need some convincing," Ethan joked, though his grin betrayed his excitement. "This is a big leap for both of us." "It's a leap worth taking," Clara countered, squeezing his hand. "We've faced challenges before and we'll face them again. But imagine what we can accomplish if we work together. Imagine the kind of world we can help create. News of Clara's resignation sent shockwaves through the business world. Analysts scrambled to explain her sudden departure, while columns speculated wildly about her motivations. Some praised her bold move, calling it visionary. Others dismissed it as reckless idealism. Richard Whitmore, predictably, was furious, at least initially. He summoned Clara to a tense meeting in his private study, his face flushed with frustration. "How could you throw away everything we've worked for?" he demanded, pacing the room. "Whitmore Industries is your birthright. Do you have any idea what this means for our family name?" "It means we're evolving," Clara responded calmly, her tone unwavering. "Dad, the world is changing. People don't just care about profits anymore, they care about purpose. If we want to stay relevant, we need to adapt. That's why I'm shifting my focus to philanthropy. It's not throwing anything away, it's reinvesting in a brighter future." Richard opened his mouth to argue, then stopped himself. For the first time, he seemed to truly see his daughter, not as the heir he'd groomed, but as a woman determined to carve her own path. Slowly, he sank into a chair, his anger giving way to resignation. "You remind me of your mother," he murmured after a long silence. "She always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard." Clara smiled softly, touched by the rare glimpse of vulnerability. "Then maybe it's time we honor her memory by doing the same." Though Richard didn't fully approve of Clara's decision, he eventually came around, grudgingly but enough to offer his support. Evelyn, on the other hand, embraced the change wholeheartedly, proud of her daughter's courage and vision. Together, they helped Clara transition out of her CEO role, ensuring Whitmore Industries remained stable under new leadership. Meanwhile, Ethan resigned from his position as a park ranger, a bittersweet farewell to a job he'd loved for years. His colleagues threw him a small send-off party, presenting him with a framed photo of the park's iconic waterfall. "You're leaving big shoes to fill," one of them teased, raising a glass in toast. "But we know you'll do amazing things wherever you go." Ethan thanked them sincerely, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Saying goodbye wasn't easy, but he knew he was stepping into something equally fulfilling, a chance to amplify his efforts on a global scale. With Clara's financial backing and Ethan's expertise, they founded Harmonia Terra, a nonprofit organization dedicated to environmental preservation and sustainable development. Their mission was simple yet ambitious: to restore damaged ecosystems, empower local communities, and inspire others to take action. Within months, Harmonia Terra gained traction, attracting volunteers, donors, and partnerships worldwide. Their projects ranged from reforestation initiatives in deforested regions to educational programs teaching children about biodiversity. They worked tirelessly, often traveling to remote locations to oversee progress firsthand. Through it all, their bond only grew stronger. The challenges they faced, logistical hurdles, funding shortages, and occasional setbacks, only reinforced their resilience and teamwork. One evening, after a particularly grueling day coordinating a tree planting event in a rural village, Ethan and Clara sat together under a starlit sky. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. Around them, newly planted saplings stood tall, symbols of hope and renewal. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I rescued you from that bee swarm, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Clara laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Neither did I. But I'm glad it did. Look at what we've built together." Ethan nodded, gazing at the horizon. "It's not perfect, but it's ours, and it's making a difference." As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty of nature they'd fought so hard to protect, Ethan realized something profound. Love wasn't just about finding someone who completed you. It was about growing alongside them, challenging each other to become better versions of yourselves. Together, he and Clara had created a life rooted in purpose, authenticity, and shared values. They weren't just partners in romance, they were partners in a greater mission: to heal the earth and inspire others to do the same. And as they looked toward the future, Hand in hand, they knew their journey was only beginning.